in session for Thursday, May 16th, 2024. And Judy, do you want to read the district mission and vision statement?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Our mission statement: educating each student to the highest standards while motivating them to reach their fullest potential and graduating them to be college, career, and life ready. Our vision statement is: our schools are a place where children belong. Each student is known by name, strength, and need, and provided the education and opportunities to achieve success. Our values are striving for equity, inclusion, and belonging, celebrating diversity, engaging the community, supporting the whole child, and promoting and achieving academic excellence.
Thank you.
And Chair, I do have one announcement. You can allow me to go now or at the end of the meeting.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to share with the board that we have received an application for our student representative to the board, and I wanted to let you know that we are proceeding with reviewing that application. I request of the chair to add that to our next board agenda if appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. So before I pass it on to start the session, I want to give a shout out to all law enforcement and the fire department this morning for what they did this morning to protect all of our kiddos and community members with the fire. With that being said, I will turn it over to Dr. Bernal.
Thank you, Chair Jones, and I concur. A shout out to all of our law enforcement partners and our fire department partners for reacting so quickly, and it was in close vicinity of one of our schools, and for the quick communication, and also just a shout out to Colonel Wright School for acting really quickly and doing exactly what they needed to do, shelter in place for our kids, and everything went smoothly. So we were grateful for that. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight in the work session. I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about our student investment account intensive program and the work that we've been doing this past year. We're just coming upon completion of year one of being in the intensive program. And I think it would be great if we could start with some introductions, especially since our ODE stewards don't know all of our board members. But just of note, you do have our vice chair, Judy Richardson, is pretty intimately involved with the intensive program as she sits on the stewarding body for the program. And we'll get into that more later in understanding how the program works and what all the moving parts are. So I'll start. I'm Dr. Bernal, the superintendent for North Wasco County School District, and I will hand it off to Dana.
Hi there, I'm Dana Winelledge. I've been on the board since July of last year, and my area is Zone 2.
Can you pass it off to somebody, Dana?
Sure, I will pass it off to John.
Hi, I'm John Nelson. I've been a board member for 11 years, and I represent Zone 4.
John, you want to hand it off to somebody?
Yes. How about Judy?
Hi, y'all know me. I'm Judy Richardson. I'm in Zone 7. These are my people. I'm so happy that you get to meet them this evening. I will pass it off to Joel.
I'm Joel Vaught. Does anybody remember how long I've been a board member?
Been a hot minute, Joel.
July or August, maybe.
August.
Yeah.
You're a month younger than me.
Okay.
Not long enough.
Long enough, yeah.
Board member since August, and I represent Zone 5. And I'll throw it to Jose.
Good evening, everyone. Jose Aparicio. I've been on the board since 2019, and I represent Zone 6. And I'll pass it off to Chair Jones.
David Jones, Zone 3. And I will pass it on to Allie.
Thanks, Chair Jones. My name's Allie Ivy. I'm a district support specialist with the Oregon Department of Education. Hopefully by the end of the night, you'll know a little bit more about what that means. But really at the heart of my work is just getting the incredible opportunity to partner with North Wasco County School Districts in the intensive program. So I've been with the department going on 3 years, but spent the majority of my career as a middle school teacher. Middle schoolers are my favorite humans in the world. And so I love when I get to come to North Wasco and see kids. And I spent a couple of years teaching in higher education as an assistant professor and doing educational research. So just excited to be here and get to share some of the beautiful work that you all have been doing in the district with the board tonight. And I'll pass it off to Kim.
Good evening. I'm Kim Fike, and I am the community engagement steward with the ODE intensive program. So there's 3 stewards that ODE provides to the district to help support the work. Myself in community engagement, and then we have another one in instruction, Karen Perez, who can't be with us tonight, and then Sarah Pierce is our leadership steward. So the 3 of us work with Allie to try and support the district in these different areas and provide just resources and whatever support we can. And I'm a former elementary school teacher and have been doing consulting work around school support, school reform work, and equity work in school districts for 25 or 30 years now. So I think, well, I'll pass it to you, CJ. So I think we all know you.
Hello, I'm CJ Toole. I'm the Director of Prevention and Intervention for North Wasco County School District. And my role currently with the intensive program is as point person for the district, working with all of our stewards. I'll pass to, who do we have?
I think Shannon.
Shannon.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually driving, but I had pulled over to join. I'm Shannon Brennan. I'm the Director of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. And I don't even know.
You're good. I think did we get everyone?
That was it. Okay.
Good. Okay. Great. So CJ, I think now you can share your screen. We're going to get into talking about the Student Investment Account Intensive Program. I'm going to hand the time off to, well, Allie, CJ, and I will probably be interacting all together throughout the presentation, but I will hand over the time right now to Allie to get us started.
Thank you, Dr. Bernal. This is just had some contact information as, do you want to go back? Yeah, this is perfect. As Kim mentioned, I'll talk through this, but as part of the intensive program, there's a couple of supports that the district receives. Part of that is financial support through grant and aid. And part of it is stewards that are really hired as contractors at ODE to support really specific areas in the district. And so Kim is here tonight to support this session. We have 2 of our other stewards who are incredible resources. We're not able to be here tonight, but just wanting to share the email addresses. So if there's any questions that come up after tonight, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We're going to be giving you a lot of information. And as CJ can tell you, it's a little bit like drinking out of a fire hose. So if you don't even know what questions to ask tonight, please do feel free to reach out at any point in time. I can also put my phone number or send my phone number to Dr. Bernal to give to you as well, if you prefer just jumping on a phone call. So I think that's who we are. So we have a couple of outcomes we wanted to share with you all tonight, just to guide the work that we're going to do together over the next 2 hours. A couple of practical outcomes. We want to support you all just in deepening your understanding of the intensive program in North Wasco. The goal is not that you're going to be experts in the intensive program, because it is a pretty deep well of learning, but we're really hopeful that you're able to speak into the why, the what, and the how, as well as know who to go to for questions that come up again after this evening. And then we also want to spend some time looking at and talking through data. So as Kim mentioned, she does a lot of consulting work and was actually able to lead some of the Critical Friends training with a couple of folks who were actually on this call, were able to participate, CJ and Shannon. And so she's going to lead us through an Atlas protocol, which is an opportunity really just to get comfortable with and build our muscle around looking at data. And so the goal is to deepen the understanding of the district's regular attendance data and current strategies to address needs across the district. So we're going to spend some time both looking at data and then having the district just share all the beautiful work that's happening around these data points. And then we have some experiential outcomes. I think it's important that we not focus on what we're going to do, but also how we're going to be together in the space. I know the goal was to be in person tonight, and I apologize. I think part of the reason we're not in person was because of me traveling and getting sick, but we're hoping that we can still create a really positive experience in the virtual space. We want to create opportunities for sense making before decision making. And so one of the things that we really try to share as part of this intensive program is we want to move slowly. So we often use the metaphor of flower seeds, that flower seeds are really beautiful, but it takes time for the flowers to be able to grow into blooms. And so we really want to slow down in this process so that we're really focusing on sense making rather than just moving straight to decision making. We want to cultivate a space that inspires curiosity, encourage to think, feel, and act creatively. So I'm going to talk at you for a little bit, which is my least favorite thing to do, but then I'm going to get to mute my mic, and Kim's going to lead you through just a conversation talking about the data. And we really hope that you have an opportunity to speak into the space and ask some questions. And then last, just deepening capacity to listen with open hearts and curious minds. Looking at data can be a little bit challenging sometimes. So we just want to make sure that we're entering this with open hearts, with curious minds, and we're really thinking about how the intensive program can just continue to support the needs of the district as we move forward with our time together. Next slide. Perfect. So you can go back to the one right before that. So this is the point where I'm gonna talk at you for a little bit, but please do feel free to interrupt. So if there are questions, I know that the chat function is not used in the Zoom space given the school board work session. With that, if you have any questions, I do not mind being interrupted. So just ask them as they come up, and then we'll also hold space at the end for questions if they arise. So given the focus of tonight's work session, I really just want to start by providing an overview of the intensive program to ensure that there's a clear understanding, like I mentioned, about the what and the why and the how of this work. I'm going to be covering a lot of information. For some of you, like Judy, this is going to feel really familiar. And for others, it might feel a little bit new. And so in the agenda, which I'm hoping you all have access to, we've included a lot of different links for deeper learning that you can refer to either during today or after today as questions come up. There's a couple things linked in that agenda. You're going to see a link to all the relevant policies associated with the intensive program. I'm not going to read through all the policies tonight because I think there are better ways to spend our time, but I want you to have access to those so that you really understand the purpose and bounds of the program. We also have a one-pager that just kind of provides an overview of the intensive program. The link there is actually going to take you to the ODE intensive program website. And so you're going to be able to find information about the intensive program, and you can also find all the minutes from our student success team meetings thus far in the year. So if you are really curious and you want to know what have we been up to in our meetings, you can find all of our meetings on that website. There's also a link to an intensive program video overview. It's about 20 minutes and just provides kind of a high-level view again of what we're up to in the intensive program. So it's something that you can go back to as you have questions. We also linked a new resource that we are so excited. Really wish that we had had this when CJ first started in the role as the district point person, but we have an intensive program new district onboarding document that goes pretty far in depth in terms of what the program is and how the district can really set up that program in the district for success. I also included the link to the North Wasco County School District Intensive Program website. This is a link that Stephanie and CJ have been working really hard on. What you're going to see there is all the team members. So if you're wondering who is on the student success team, you're able to see their names. And you're also going to be able to see which recommendations have been approved. I'm going to talk through those tonight, but again, if you want to learn more, you're going to be able to see the full recommendations in their entirety. And then calling out Dr. Richardson, we had a flow chart for our recommendation process that we developed. And I'm guessing since you all work with her, you know how beautiful and creative her mind is. So she took a pretty basic flow chart and turned it into a beautiful learning opportunity. And we're actually going to have her share that tonight. I hope you're okay with that, Dr. Richardson. But I linked that for you as well. So one thing that I want to make sure is that, like I said, anybody jump in as we're talking through this. Kim, CJ, and Dr. Bernal, I'm sure I'm going to miss things. So add connections, questions, anything that you want to as we're going through. All right, any questions before we kind of dive into the content? Practice my teacher wait time. Okay, perfect. So a really core component of the intensive program is that it is by invitation only. And it's based on eligibility that's determined by the department, and we'll talk about what that eligibility is shortly. And the intensive program is an opt-in program. And so districts have the choice about whether or not they would like to accept the invitation from the Oregon Department of Education. We have some districts that do choose to accept, and we have some districts that choose not to accept for various different reasons. But I wanted to turn it over to Dr. Bernal just to really ground us tonight in the why. So why did North Wasco decide to accept the invitation into the intensive program?
Thanks, Ali. So when we received our initial invitation to become part of the intensive program work, I sat down with a few of our cabinet members. We're looking at the letter and kind of thinking, like, what is this? What is this program about? So we decided to do a little homework. We reached out to our ODE partners and asked if we could set up a meeting with them, an initial meeting with them, to understand better what the program was all about, and also to understand a little more about how North Wasco was chosen and why we were invited. So we went through that process, and then the next thing we did was we asked, well, are there any other districts who are currently in the program? Could we reach out to them and meet with them and talk about what their experience has been in the program thus far, and kind of get a feel for, like, are there pros, are there cons, like what is the program about? And so we were able to connect with Reynolds School District, who has been in the program now, I believe, 2 years. Yes. And we set up time to meet with them and their team, and got to ask a lot of questions and develop a better understanding of if we opted in for the program, what would North Wasco be experiencing? So we really appreciated Reynolds School District for sharing their experience with us. And so then as a cabinet team, we talked about it at length, and in addition to receiving grant and aid for the district to be able to support a lot of the strategic work we're trying to do, it also, we thought it would be beneficial for us to have other outside lens come in alongside us. And it's truly so far been an excellent experience, because they truly have come alongside us and are really supporting the work we're trying to do, but also provide an outside perspective and have become really great thought partners for us. So, we couldn't, the pros of opting in far outweighed any cons, and we thought this is a great opportunity for North Wasco.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Bernal. And I think one thing that I'll just highlight that you mentioned is this notion of partnership. The goal of this program really is partnership, and it's really thinking about not how to change anything that the district is doing, but how to come alongside and to support the initiatives the district is currently working on. And so really thinking about the district strategic plan, about the mission and vision, about the SIA plan, right? How can the stewards and myself come along and really be able to provide that thought partnership as part of the work? And so I'm glad that you lift that up, because that's something that we really take to heart. And this work is this just incredible partnership opportunity that we have. So I'm going to talk kind of from the beginning of the program through where we are now. So CJ, if you want to go to the next slide. What I mentioned earlier was that this is, again, an invitation-only program. And so I want to spend a little bit of time just sharing the metrics that are used to determine eligibility for the intensive program. Just full transparency, I do qualitative research. I am not a statistician. And so I'm going to go through these tonight. And If you have questions that you want like kind of deeper answers to, please feel free to let me know and we can definitely get those answered for you. But what's really important is that the way in which the metrics were identified were really helpful in thinking about not only looking at overall performance of students, but thinking about the complexity of students being served. And so what you're going to notice as we talk about this is the department spent a lot of time really thinking about how do we identify high needs districts and how do we make sure that we're not just using one metric, because we know that, you know, it's not going to give us that deep information that we're looking for in terms of the needs. And so got 4 different essentially indices were identified, and these serve as the program metrics. So we have a needs index, we have an all students index, a focal student group index, and a gap index, with all 4 of these combined to determine overall eligibility. And so I'm just going to move left to right. So that needs index combines the percentage of students of color, students identified to receive special education services, students who receive English language development support, and students who meet the new criteria for economically disadvantaged. The second metric, or the second index, is the all student index. And this includes outcome data for all students using the SIA common metrics. And so the SIA common metrics are regular attendance, 3rd grade reading, 9th grade on track, and 4-year graduation. And those data points are normed against all other districts in the state. And then we have a focal student group index. And this is going to use the same outcome data as the all students. So again, those big 4, regular attendance, 3rd grade reading, 9th grade on track, and high school graduation. But for the focal student group index, instead of measuring all students, it's looking only at focal group students. And those are the focal group students that are identified and defined in SIA. So this includes students of color, tribal indigenous students, students with disabilities, multilingual students, students navigating poverty, students experiencing houselessness, students in foster care, and other students who have historically experienced academic disparities. And then finally, to the far right, we have the gap index. And that gap index is the difference between the overall outcomes for students and the overall outcomes for focal group students. So it's essentially the difference between the green all students index and then that light blue focal group index. And so these indices combine to provide eligibility metrics that, again, consider both student outcome data and then that student demographic data in the districts in order to identify those districts most in need, with really a focus on understanding the complexity of the students being served. And so Dr. Bernal, I think, has access to the data in terms of, you know, what we're looking at. But again, if you're interested and want to talk more about that or just talk into what does the data actually look like, let me know and we can absolutely do that. So once a district receives that invitation and decides to opt in, they agree to participate for a minimum of 4 years. And this is a really important part of the program because this program is really designed to move towards building capacity for systems change. And what research tells us, what life tells us, is that systems change takes time. And so the goal is really to support the district over that 4-year period of time to move toward that systemic change. And so as Dr. Bernal mentioned, this school year, the 23-24 school year, marked the first year in the program for North Wasco. So we are definitely still learning and growing into the program as a team, and we're really excited to be able to get some information from our student success team members at the end of this year to think about how we can be just continuing to improve our practice. So a couple of things that, again, Dr. Bernal mentioned, but participating districts do receive additional grant and aid, and this grant and aid is designed to supplement student investment account resources. And available resources are dependent upon legislative action, and they're distributed based on the total ADMW of participating school districts. So for North Wasco, this equates to approximately $2.8 million. And so there's a small portion of collaboration and coordination funds that are immediately accessible to the districts, but beyond these dollars, funds can only be spent through a recommendation process, and we're going to talk about that shortly. So this grant and aid functions really differently than traditional grant and aid, in that any grant and aid that is spent out of that $2.8 million has to go through the recommendation process as part of the student success team, really with the goal being to think about how can we do what is best for the district by increasing that community voice. And then Kim also spoke to this, and so did Dr. Bernal, but districts are also assigned stewards, and those stewards support the district in building capacity in the areas of leadership, teaching and learning, and community engagement. And then participating districts have dedicated ODE staff member, that's me, And I really serve as a connector, a thought partner, a capacity builder, sometimes just a listener. Love to be on site, so a visitor, really whatever the district needs. And I serve in this role really to create alignment between the district and the department. So there's a lot of ODE alignment that happens as part of the intensive program that we'll talk about shortly. And so what does this mean for the district? So there are a couple of participation requirements, which you can see on the screen. And so a district agrees to hold regular student success team meetings to monitor practice, progress, and as well as consider recommendations, to accept all recommendations related to the use of student investment account grant monies and the additional funding received through this program, to consider all recommendations pertaining to general programs and practices, and then to produce an annual report that includes information regarding the recommendations that move through that student success team. And that should be available on the website, because really the goal is to create transparency with the community about what this group is doing and why. So before we jump into the legal framework and some of the policy and rules, do anybody have any questions? I know I've already thrown a lot at you. Okay. Again, feel free to interrupt as questions arise. So what you're going to see on the screen here is a list of relevant statutes and relevant rules. I'm not going to talk you through all of those, but those are linked on the agenda. They are linked on the onboarding document. If you are interested in talking through them with me, I would love to do that at a different time. But I do want to point out that, as Dr. Bernal mentioned, this is part of the student investment account. So the student investment account under the Student Success Act directed the Department of Education to establish an intensive program for school districts with the highest needs in the state. And this is ORS 327.222. And so we're not going to go through that this evening. But again, I want to make sure that you know where to go to find that information, so that you have access to that if you're curious about some of those kind of purpose and intent of the intensive program.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say accept all recommendations, what does that actually mean to the district?
That's a good question. So essentially what that means is that if a district opts in to take part in the program, that they are agreeing that if a recommendation is approved, that they are going to accept that recommendation. So for example, there was a recommendation to provide kind of a budget, additional funding to support the student success team meetings, to ensure that people that were participating were compensated for their time, that there was dinner being served, that there's childcare and transportation available. And so because that is requesting money, grant and aid, then the district, because it was approved by that stewarding body, has to accept that recommendation. What's really important about that, because I feel like, I know when I first saw that, I was like, ooh, that might feel, I have some feelings about that. What's really important to remember is that Dr. Bernal is on the stewarding body and Dr. Judy Richardson is on the stewarding body. So, and they can speak to this a little bit. So far, there has not been a situation where a recommendation has come up that everybody on the stewarding body hasn't already talked through so deeply that by the time it gets to that point, there don't seem to be a lot of questions. That might not be the case all of the time, but it's definitely something where there's a lot of opportunity for feedback and discussion before a recommendation ever moves to the approval process.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bernal and Dr. Richardson, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like that can be a little bit just confusing if we're not understanding that process. And I can also just talk about it later when we get to the recommendations.
Well, I'll let Dr. Bernal go, but it might also make sense when we walk through the flow sheet of how recommendations go through and like all of the stop checkpoints.
And there are many stop checkpoints, as you'll know in a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. I think as we get into how the recommendation process works, there'll probably be a better understanding of it developed.
Perfect. Yeah. And so, John, hold on to that, because if that question is still coming up, I want to make sure that we address it when we move through that recommendation process. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So while the policies determine the purpose and the intent of the intensive program, The intensive program itself is built on improvement science. And so improvement science is evidence-based research that really takes a problem-solving approach centered on continuous learning and inquiry, where change ideas are tested in rapid cycles, and we call these PDSA cycles: plan, do, study, and act. And the goal is that there is useful feedback in real time to inform systems improvement. And so this approach has been used within and outside of education. It's used a lot in healthcare and the medical system, really as a way to think about the fact that change is not the result of an individual, but it's really the result of the design of the system and a system's ability to operate in a manner that is both adaptable and sustainable. And so the structure of the intensive program utilizes the work of improvement science, really leaning on Carnegie Foundation because they do a lot of work in the realm of education, as well as other leaders in the fields in its design. So our recommendations really serve as the theory of change. So what are we noticing and how are we going to test out an idea, a change idea, to see if we can create a shift? And then we have progress checks, and we'll talk about progress checks, but basically they're an opportunity to test that theory or that recommendation in real time to make sure that what we're doing is actually working. We often talk about with the student success team that nothing we do is set in stone, because there's continual opportunities to provide feedback and to create change, because we really want to make sure that we're being mindful of the context and the needs in the district. And we know that things change over time. So the way that the program is really set up is to lean in, listen, and learn to those needs so that we can really make sure that we are being proactive instead of reactive. So I've mentioned a few key aspects of the program, but I want to provide a little bit more detail about each of them. So I've talked a lot about internal alignment. I've talked a lot about student success team. And so let's get in a little bit further with regard to what that actually means. So ODE really aims to infuse high-need districts with resources, expertise, and support to elevate community voice and drive sustainable systems change in their schools. As I mentioned before, this really is a partnership model between the districts and the Oregon Department of Education. And we think about this in 3 different buckets. So the first is ODE internal alignment. So I meet regularly with staff at ODE who also support North Wasco. So for example, I meet with title staff. I meet with folks that support special education. I meet with LTCT staff, really as a way to make sure that we are examining ways to reduce burden, align processes, and re-examine policies to dismantle systems that are detrimental to student and district success. Again, the goal is how can we better support the district? And so my role as a district support specialist is to find out what you all need and how I can release that or lessen that burden, reduce that burden. And this also really creates an opportunity to support the district to ensure alignment and collaboration efforts meet the identified needs. The second thing, and I know this visual is very small, but you're going to see it a lot bigger in just a minute, is our student success team. And this is the heart of the work of our intensive program. And the student success team is composed of both internal and external members. Recommendation and decision-making is utilized through the student success team through engaging both a stewarding body and an advisory body. And we'll talk more about what that means. And then finally, I know we've talked a lot about stewards, but they really help us to put all the pieces together. And so as I mentioned, each district has 3 stewards who come with just a huge level of expertise and knowledge, an opportunity to be able to lean in and learn alongside the district. So this is the visual that we use to talk about the student success team. If you've seen this before, it might have looked a little bit different. We had a graphic designer. We probably just had Judy design it, but we had a graphic designer make it nice looking. And so, as I mentioned, the student success team really is the heart of this work. It is what makes the work happen. And so the student success team advises and counsels the district on how to improve student outcomes and develops recommendations for meeting performance growth targets. And so the grant and aid, as I mentioned, associated with the program really functions differently than other grant and aid, in that all spending of these funds occurs only on the basis of recommendations that are developed and approved by the student success team. And so the student success team, as I mentioned before, is made up of the stewarding body and the advisory body, as we can see from the visual. I'm going to start on the left with the stewarding body. And so the stewarding body includes 7 recommendation approving members. So there's 3 internal and 4 external, 4 external. And this is just stated in statute and rule. And so our internal members, which we have a lot of here today, is superintendent, Dr. Bernal, a school board member or a community member, so Dr. Judy Richardson, and then a teacher leader. And our teacher leader on our stewarding body is Val Rector, who teaches at the middle school. And then CJ Toole is not a recommendation approver on the stewarding body, doesn't participate in the consensus process, but he serves an integral role in helping to align our practices, facilitate conversations, and really just serves as like the rock of the work, right? Really foundational to what we do. And our external members of the stewarding body are me as the ODE point person, and then our 3 stewards. So Sarah Pierce, our leadership steward, Dr. Karen Perez, our teaching and learning steward, and then our community steward, Kim. And so moving to the right side of our visual, our green side, as with the stewarding body, the advisory body includes both internal and external members. And so the goal is to include school administrators, educators, both classified and certified, students, parents, families, and caregivers, and community members, in addition to ESE personnel, additional ODE staff, community partners, and district contracted supports if applicable. And then CJ, who's a district point person, serves as a member of the advisory body. And so ultimately the aim is really to create balance between district staff and the larger community. And we renew membership annually to say, hey, how's it going? Like, whose voices aren't at the table that we need to make sure that we consider? And so we're going to be in that process in just a little bit here.
Hey, Allie.
Yeah.
Can I just underline a point for my fellow board members, because we don't typically work face-to-face with ODE staff. And so everybody, the picture that you're seeing here, all those folks, especially John, the advisory body, those are all from our district folks. These are all local people who are looking at these recommendations and thinking about, does this make sense for us? Is this, yeah.
Thank you for underscoring that. Yeah, Judy, super important. And you can see all the members of the advisory body on the website. So you can get a sense of kind of who they are and where they're coming from. But as Judy mentioned, it's really important that the folks on the advisory body are representative of the larger community. Currently, we have an absolutely incredibly committed and thoughtful advisory body. We have 26 members. I think we take the blue ribbon for having the largest advisory body out of all the current intensive program districts. And that's because people want to be involved. I mean, we definitely have a good problem in the fact that so many people want to be part of this work and really care deeply about this work, which really speaks to what's happening in North Wasco, and people really want to be involved and share in the learning. And so we have folks who span a variety of roles on our advisory body. We have teachers and administrators, we have parents, we have students who are absolutely brilliant. I mean, I can't even imagine coming to a meeting with a group of adults and raising your hand and speaking into the space. We have just incredible students in the district, and also community partners. And so, as I mentioned, we're really going to work at the end of this year just to think about the balance on the advisory body, so that we can make sure that we really have representation from across the community. And CJ, we can go to the next one. Perfect. And so that's great. What does it actually mean to serve as a member of the student success team? And so this visual helps to clarify a little bit of the role of each of the bodies and the work that they do together. So that advisory body steers and charges. So basically what this means is that they steer the direction of the stewarding body, and they charge the stewarding body with making evidence-based recommendations based on needs and perspectives, while steering the direction of proposed recommendations by sharing content expertise, lived experience, asking questions, providing feedback. Oftentimes our advisory members are collaborating with members of the stewarding body to write recommendations. So they serve a really integral role in advising this work moving forward. And as Judy mentioned, they're members of the community. So they're really important folks to have at the table to think about, their perspectives and their lived experience. And then we have the stewarding body, and that's that smaller group. So the stewarding body, what we think about them doing is exploring and recommending. And so this means that they'll both explore district needs and ideas and recommendations brought forth, sometimes by the advisory body, sometimes by folks just across the districts. as well as develop, refine, and approve recommendations through the use of a consensus-based decision-making process. And so we use a consensus process as part of the stewarding body. We really try to stay away of the language of voting because the goal is that we come to consensus. And so school board member John, this comes back to the question you mentioned before about that recommendation. If there's a situation where anybody on the stewarding body doesn't feel like the recommendation is going to be a good fit, this comes out in the consensus process. And we don't move a recommendation forward if anybody blocks that recommendation or feels it's not an appropriate use of funds or it's not going to best serve students. So this is a process that we have had a lot of really good success with so far, and just really getting to make sure that we're on the same page as we move forward. And then together in the orange up top, the advisory body and the stewarding body engage in progress checks. And so these progress checks are an opportunity for dialogue to make sure, are the recommendations actually working? Is the SIA investments, are they really doing what they were intended to do? And if they're not, what can we do to create support? And so these progress checks are really an opportunity to look at data. And so our advisory body members and our stewarding body members are getting really familiar with the Atlas protocol. We probably could have had our advisory body members at this point come and facilitate this conversation, because we use this protocol to look at data and say, hey, what is the data telling us? And what do we need to do to make, course corrects to make sure that what we're doing is really serving students? Okay, where to the fun part where I almost get to unmute, or mute, not unmute. So if we think about the student success team as the heart of the intensive program, I really love a metaphor, so hopefully this tracks. I kind of think about the recommendation process as like the circulatory system. So it's really helping everything move. And so this flow chart really provides context and understanding that flow from initial idea to that consensus process. And I know Judy is going to talk through this, but I want to make sure just to highlight as many times as we need to, that what's most important is understanding that recommendation process is iterative. So there are so many opportunities for discussion and clarifying questions and feedback and refinement. I think that what folks will probably tell you if they have been part of the recommendation process is it takes a long time. It's not a quick process, and this is intentional because it really is designed to be deliberate so that if a recommendation is approved, folks on the student success team feel confident and they know what it is about and they know the purpose and they're able to communicate that with folks in their spaces and their communities and their networks. And so as you can see, there's so many different little bubbles on here because we're really making sure that there's a lot of opportunities for conversation before any recommendation is approved. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and mute and turn it over to Dr. Richardson.
Oh, thanks. So, hey, Allie, I want to go ahead and share the mural itself, if that's all right,
Perfect.
because then we can actually see. Okay.
That sounds perfect.
I think you might need to unshare.
That's what I was just
CJ.
There we go.
All right. So this is not a work of art or anything. I couldn't get my head around how this process went. So I had to draw myself a picture, get feedback, draw myself a picture and be like, Allie, is this right? Is this how this is supposed to work? So here, let me share what I've made. Okay. Make my screen bigger. Can you see mural and its intensive program recommendation process? Excellent. Thank you for going through that. So as Ali said, there are two main groups of folks who look at recommendations, and the swim lanes here represent those two groups. So the stewarding body, that's a smaller group here, and the advisory body. But how does this even get started? So my business brain loves this because it's kind of like an incubator. If you have a great idea, because you've seen something in our district that needs attention or possibly could use some sort of programmatic solution that needs some funding, then the idea can start just about anywhere, but usually it starts in the advisory body because those are our parents, our students, our teachers who know there are issues going on. And so the advisory body's role is to steer and advise the stewarding body about district needs and charges the stewarding body with making recommendations. And so they can make a recommendation. AB stands for advisory body. This here icon is a mirror, which indicates reflection. So the steward or the district personnel will write that up and have some reflection. The advisory body can share the insights and what the issue was to the stewarding body in a proposal that outlines what the issue is. And then the stewarding body can think about that, look at data, make some recommendations based on their insights. And sorry, Allie, I said vote here, but we're trying to come to some consensus and discussion. And there's a lot of opportunity here to ask clarifying questions or probing questions and get the sense of the temperature for the idea. Is it really the right thing for our district? Is it going to be the solution that will address the need or the problem appropriately? Lots of opportunities here to ask clarifying questions. So after that, there's usually a recommendation champion. So there's our hero there who prepares the recommendation, gathers detail, and they may call on subject matter experts who might not necessarily be in the student success team, but they know details about how salary works. For example, if we're looking at a teacher on special assignment, or if there's some sort of information or data that we need, they can help to inform that recommendation. There's an opportunity for proposal reflection again. And then once that recommendation is drafted, it's shared with the stewarding body before our next meeting. We ask, well, wait a minute, I don't understand this, or have you thought about that, as clarifying and probing questions. That recommendation can get refined after the stewarding body review and run through the district equity decision-making tool, or the ODE also has an equity decision-making tool. So is this proposed recommendation going to contribute to equity in our district? And we're also thinking about, our mission, vision, and values, as well as our strategic plan and how that recommendation aligns with all of those goals. Then the advisory body can reflect on the proposal and ask their questions. That proposal can be refined again. So this gets to where Allie said it's a long process because there's a lot of refinement, a lot of questions and checking. Once that proposal is refined, it can be shared to the stewarding body, which then can discuss, here's our consensus process. This fist represents fist to 5. It's a consensus gleaning process. So it can really help folks who are a little bit unsure talk about their questions or ask for more discussion. Once we have a recommendation, here we go, to this joint body, this little circular diagram here represents the PDSA cycle and how we measure the impact of the recommendation. Is this the problem we're trying to solve? Are we making an impact? Is it serving the intended purpose once the recommendation gets implemented? Did I skip something there, Allie? How did I do?
You did great. A+.
So Judy, can you give us an example of a recommendation that went through and kind of take us through that cycle that you just did on a hypothetical? I mean, I'd like to see an example of something you really grappled with. Go through that process.
Dr. Bernal or CJ, you talk a little bit. I could, but go ahead.
You know what I'm wondering? We're on the next slide. We have the 4 recommendations that have been approved.
That's
so
a good example.
I'm wondering if we go through those and then Dr. Bernal or CJ, maybe if you want to identify one and we can kind of work through Judy's flow chart. Would that be helpful? Okay, so that way you can see what all the recommendations are to be a little bit more concrete, and then we'll move through that process.
Before that, I've got a question because I know the next slides are going to explain the recommendations that have been done to date. But what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, so, we've got the monies from just the SIA account, right? And there's endeavors on how the district is utilizing those monies. The intensive program is in addition to. So I guess my overall question, I didn't see it in the flow chart, but is the SIA a starting point? And so is the intensive program meant to enhance or further along some of the components within our SIA already? Or is this to then add additional items that weren't captured in the SIA? Does that make sense?
It does. And I would say it's both. So
Okay.
it's definitely designed to enhance SIA, right? So the way to think about it is the intensive program has purview over both intensive program grant and aid and SIA grant and aid. And the reason being is that they're both funded out of the Student Success Act. They're funded out of different funds, but the goal really is to be able to enhance the work that you all are already doing at the SIA and to add, right? Like you mentioned, what's maybe not captured in that student investment account, outcomes and strategies or budgets. And so the goal is that these funds are in addition to what's already happening in the district. It's not an overwhelming amount of money, right? So it's not going to
Right.
change a lot, but it's going to allow for some things that maybe are needed as they're coming up to be able to extend the funds that are already provided through SIA. So you were right on it. We should have recorded that because that is exactly what's intended to do, both of those.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before we walk through the current recommendations and then move through that process? Perfect. CJ, if you want to share your screen, I'm just going to briefly walk through those recommendations and then nose goes to who wants to talk about the example. And we can go to the next one. There we go. Nope. Yep, right there. So here are the 4 recommendations that have currently been approved as of today for the intensive program grant and aid. And so what you're going to see on there, I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit more depth, but we had the Director of Prevention and Intervention, and this was approved in February. In terms of timeline, this recommendation was brought forth in October. So what we can see is that it's not always quick. I'm sure much to the chagrin of some folks that want things to move a little bit quicker. That one took a little bit of time. And we had a lot of feedback and refinement because of the feedback that was received from the advisory body. A recommendation that was for the Director of Prevention and Intervention to also serve as the intensive program point person was actually split. And so this was an opportunity to actually think about what feedback we were receiving from the advisory body and make real changes to the recommendation. And so what was one recommendation became 2 recommendations. And so the second approved recommendation is a 0.5 FTE for an intensive program point person, which allows for one person to spend half time, so about 20 hours a week, really coordinating the work of the intensive program. We also have the student success team participation support, and I'll talk more about that in a bit, and that was approved in February. And then we have the special education process review, which again, I'll talk through, and that was approved in March. Yeah, Judy.
Thanks. I didn't want to interrupt you. So when that happened, when that idea, there was an idea, it started in the stewarding body. We went through the probing questions. We made a recommendation. We got some outside advice about, well, what's the salary, all of that. Went to the joint group, and the advisory body said, ooh, this should be split. It went back to the beginning, and we re-asked, okay, the probing questions and the clarifying questions, if you split this, because it's essentially a new recommendation, not totally new. We were familiar with the idea, but it went back through the process to gain consensus and to make sure that it passed the sniff test from the very beginning.
I like the idea of the sniff test. I think that should be added somewhere on your chart. I think what that also points to is that process isn't necessarily linear, right? So we might be somewhere in the process and realize we need to kind of go back to the beginning. And so that first recommendation definitely, I think, tested the patience and the flexibility and the openness of the group. And I think we got a really good product, right? Because we were actually able to think deeply about the feedback that was being received and respond to that. And so I just want to talk a little bit high level about these 4 recommendations that have been approved. So we have, like I said, the Director of Prevention and Intervention. And so this recommendation establishes a leadership level role, to build and support multi-tiered systems of support district-wide, to think really intentionally and develop district-wide systems to address chronic absenteeism, to serve as the district administrator for long-term care and treatment programs, to develop and oversee the Department of Prevention and Intervention alongside behavior specialists, and to standardize the functional behavior assessment systems and processes across the districts. And other duties is assigned, because I know that I did not cover everything in this position. but the goal is to have a recommendation to have a director level position doing the work of prevention and intervention. And so this recommendation uses a tapered funding model. And so the goal is that during the 23-24 school year, the intensive program grant and aid will fund 100% of this position, and that will decrease by 25% over each school year. So next school year, intensive program will be funding 75%, with the remaining funds being braided and blended with other funding sources, following year 50%, following year 25%. The intensive program point person, as Judy mentioned, this was really designed on the basis of feedback from the advisory body in splitting what was one recommendation into two. And so this recommendation supports funding for a 0.5 FTE position. This will be fully funded by the intensive program grant and aid. And the reason being is that ODE requested that districts that participate in this program have a person on staff that has a 0.5 FTE. And so that is the reason for the full funding being supported through the intensive program. And the person in this position will coordinate and facilitate the SIA intensive program and its processes. This includes monitoring, tracking, facilitating, refining. And so this recommendation was approved in February with a cost of $27,000 to $47,000, just depending upon pay scale of the individual. And then we have the student success team participation. And so this recommendation was brought forth to better ensure that there are equitable opportunities for folks across the community to participate in our meetings. And so this includes compensation for participation. It also includes dinner. So we have community dinner before each one of our meetings, which is just a beautiful connection opportunity and community building opportunity. It also includes funds for childcare and transportation as requested, in case those are barriers to participation. This funding is included for each year of the intensive programs, district's participation in the intensive program with an annual cost of about $11,000. And then finally, we have a special education process review. This was the most recently approved recommendation. And this requests a one-time funding amount to hire a third-party evaluator to review the district programs, instruction systems, processes, procedures, determine the effectiveness and make recommendations for improvement, specifically within the special education department and systems. The request for proposals for this contractor is available on the district website, and I will also add the RFP link into our agenda so that you can see that. And this recommendation was approved for a one-time funding request of $100,000. And Judy, what you got for us?
So just to illustrate for that last one that you discussed, John, this came out of like looking at data and somebody saying, why are there so many SPED categories kids? And people were like, I don't know. I don't know. And looking at the data and trying to figure out, are we, categorizing kids in a standard way? I don't know. And so to figure that out, a recommendation was made to kind of dig a bit deeper, to do an evaluation, to see how kids are being categorized and hopefully clarify what's going on, on the ground floor level, for example.
I love your additions, Judy. They're so helpful. Given these, would it be helpful to walk through with an example recommendation that's gone through to walk through that process? What do folks think?
Well, I asked for it, so.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Judy, if you can share your mural.
I will. Yeah, perfect. I'll drive and you can talk. How's that?
CJ or Dr. Brown, do you want to identify a recommendation and talk through it? Or Kim? I feel like people have heard a whole lot of my voice tonight.
I think the best one to maybe use as an example is the SST participation, which was the student success team, SST participation. So in the beginning, when we first started learning of how this works, and looking at all the things that need to be set up, and it was fairly obvious that we're going to need a budget. There's meetings we have to hold. There's potential barriers to participation, which is really kind of was the cornerstone of what started it. We wanted to make sure that we had the resources in place to let people participate. and to assist them participating if need be. So that's sort of how it got started. And then it led to getting in and having to learn what all those numbers and everything meant. Like, what does that actually cost? Get into the CBA, figure out, what are the requirements as far as pay, and working from there as a small group to put together all those details so that we could then present it or share it with the stewarding body for their first round of feedback on it.
CJ, this is Judy. So clarify who the we were. The we were. Who had the idea?
The original idea was in discussion with the stewards about a very common, I think, topic, which is, okay, we're going to put together, a couple of bodies of people here. And one of them is, we really want people to be able to participate in it. Everybody has very full lives. So how do we go about making sure there's an equitable approach for people to be able to participate? So that's how, so you put it out and you say, what are all the barriers we can think of? And we start going through those, like in the ones that pop up the most are transportation. And actually it started with a survey. We sent a survey out to the existing members so we could begin collecting data. And then we started identifying the barriers: transportation, childcare, and then also combined in the compensation for staff participating, because we do have staff that participate. And so understanding, like, what are what was the CBA requirements, things, all those things had to come together.
Yeah, and I would just add, and then Kim, might ask that you step in because you were actually the recommendation champion for that particular recommendation. Really an important aspect, and CJ mentioned it with a survey, is that when a recommendation is brought forth, that there is a concrete reason, right? It's not just because it seems like it will be important, but that we're using, again, one of our agreements or kind of goals for tonight was sense making before decision making. And so sense making of saying, okay, we gave everybody a survey, and what we realized was that some folks can't get there, right? Transportation may be an issue. We're having our meetings at 5 o'clock. Like, that may create a barrier for people in terms of dinner time. Can we provide dinner? If people aren't able to attend because they have childcare needs, how can we support them in making sure that those childcare needs are taken care of? And so that sense making happened through a survey that was provided to all members of the student success team, so that Kim, as the recommendation champion, and then others that were working on the recommendation could really look at data to say, what do we need to make sure that we are reducing barriers for participation? And then we move through those different stages. So Kim, if you have anything to add, since you were leading the charge.
I can just take it that next step, from that champion spot. We had that idea, we had that survey, and then CJ and I met with Andrea Flores, who's one of our community members. We involved one of our community members in the process to write the actual recommendation to make sure we were getting different perspectives on it and trying to hit all of the pieces and making sure we weren't missing anything. So the three of us wrote the first draft of the recommendation, and then we took it to the stewarding body. And so we have a Google form that we use. So we ask folks on the stewarding body, read through this recommendation and then respond to it with this Google form. What questions are coming up for you? What's kind of warm feedback? What are the things you like about this proposal? What do you not like, or what's missing from the proposal? And the stewarding body gave us all their feedback on that. And then the three of us took that feedback and went back and did a second reiteration of the proposal to incorporate all of those feedback and questions.
And I'd like to interject just a little bit so people understand, like, it's literally taking a spreadsheet of feedback, building a feedback table, and addressing each piece of feedback one at a time.
And what we try to do is create varying opportunities for feedback, because what we know is that people engage in different ways. And so for this particular recommendation, because the timing, we were actually able to bring this recommendation to an advisory body meeting and engage in a protocol where people were able to have discussions in small groups, to ask questions, to provide feedback. Other times we do it through a form, which can be really helpful because then it's anonymous and we get really honest feedback. And And sometimes it's hard feedback for the people that are working on the recommendation. Sometimes it requires some changing in wording. Sometimes it requires completely shifting a recommendation. But we track all of that. And so for every recommendation, if you look at the recommendations that have been developed, you can see all of the feedback that was received and how that feedback was refined, it was used to refine the recommendation, because the goal with this really is collaboration and transparency. And so I think what's important is that what's not on this flow chart, that doesn't need to be on this particular flow chart, but so what happens when a recommendation is approved, right? So we moved through, we did the consensus process, and we said, okay, student success team participation. The stewarding body says, yep, I think we were all like 4s and 5s. This is really important. So what next? And so what happens next is that there is a process of developing an implementation plan. And the reason being is that we want to make sure that we're being really intentional about how the recommendation is actually going to be implemented. We can have a great idea, but we want to make sure that great idea is actually going to be implemented in a way that is aligned with that recommendation. And so what happens is that as soon as the recommendation is approved, CJ and I meet with the recommendation champion, as well as anyone else who is collaborating on that recommendation, and we put together an implementation plan. There's a form that we use, and this includes all sorts of different information. So it includes the desired outcomes. What are we hoping for from this recommendation? Judy mentioned it's kind of like an incubator, right? Like, what was that initial goal? What are our outcomes? We also identify the success metrics. How do we know if it's actually working? We look at the target date by which we want the recommendation to be fully implemented. Sometimes the target date is 2027 because we want to make sure that we have time for things to be able to really, implement and be able to bloom. Other ones that might be fully implemented within a couple of months. We also identify milestones. So what are we looking for as measures of success? 0 to 3 months, 3 to 12 months, 12 plus months. We identify what data will be used for progress checks, because again, we want to make sure that we're sense making before decision making. And so we work through what is quantitative data, what is qualitative data that we're actually going to be able to use to determine the effectiveness of this recommendation. And then perhaps most important, we identify who's going to be responsible. So we want to make sure that there are individuals in the district that have the capacity to implement the recommendation, so that we're not just putting something out there that isn't actually feasible to implement and implement well. The implementation plans will be up on the website. They're not up there yet because, again, we're kind of leaning into and learning this process as we go, but you'll be able to see those implementation plans. And what we encourage is that if there's folks on the advisory body that are really interested in particular recommendations, that they join on the implementation plans, because we really want this to be a collective process, because everyone's voices are what are needed to make sure that this works. What I will mention, and Judy had said, hey, we got the feedback, we kind of had to start over. Nothing is set in stone. So if we look through the kind of circular part on the flow chart for that PDSA cycle, we're going to progress check all of these recommendations. So we haven't progress checked our recommendations yet because they were only approved in February and March. But if we take that example of the student success team participation, we're going to come together as a student success team and say, okay, let's look at our data. What are people saying? Is it effective? Are people participating? Is this the right support that we're providing? There could be a scenario where people say, you know what, the location isn't working. We need a change. And so what we're going to do as a body is say, okay, let's refine our recommendation. There could be a situation where a recommendation is discontinued. So we decide it no longer serves the need as a district. And so we could discontinue it. And so what's really important, again, is that we're constantly thinking about this cycle of refinement and dialogue to make sure that what is happening in the district is actually serving the needs of the students, of the families, and of the communities. Judy, I love that you are working in real time. Your brain just makes me so happy. And
I'm happy to cut this up into PDFs and share for the minutes, and anybody's welcome to look at it. Anybody who's listening in, or the board members, if you want to digest it a bit. It took me a while.
That would be really, really helpful, I think, because I tried to like take screenshots of it and it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
I can do that.
Okay, that would be amazing. And Kim, were you going to add something in there?
I was just going to ask if that was helpful to folks
Oh,
to walk through that example.
It made all the difference in the world to understand what you're doing here. So,
Draw
yeah.
a picture. It's amazing.
We're all trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, you know, this can also be something, whatever is helpful to the board. You know, we can keep doing this, keep walking through particular recommendations and showing progress, because I do think it can feel really abstract until you have an actual example. And so, you know, if more examples would be helpful, you just let us know what you need as we continue leaning into this work together. All right, I'm going to go through the next two pieces pretty quick because I want to make sure we have time to talk about the data, since that is what I'm most excited about. I wanted to spend just a little bit of time, CJ, on the next slide. And the next slide just talks about funds. I know that this is something important for you all to be able to track and be aware of. And so what this goes through is expenditures, looking at the status, those expenditures that have currently been expended or claimed, and then what the funding request is, as well as, you know, what is encumbered based on approved recommendations. What you're going to see here is that currently the only funding that has been claimed by the district is the collaboration and coordination funds. These were funds that were used to start the intensive program. They're kind of considered like startup funds. The only reason why the additional funds haven't been claimed yet is because with the change in CFO, there are certain requirements for districts to be able to submit claims into the ODE system. Randy now has full approval to submit claims. So I think if we met in a couple of days, this chart would probably look pretty different. But this just shows that when all of the funds are expended for these approved recommendations, we're still looking at about $2.2 million. And many of these carry over across 1 year. So the only one on here that's a one-time funding is going to be that special education process review, whereas the others carry over across 4 years. Again, remembering that a recommendation isn't necessarily going to carry over because there could be a scenario where a recommendation is shifted or changed. Yeah, Jose.
So just quick clarifying. So the 2.8 grant award amount, that is the full amount for the entire 4 years. So
yes, on
an annual basis, that's about a little over 700K.
You got it.
Okay.
Yep. But the district has access to all $2.8 million. Kind of
At the onset.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'll just note in that fund balance, in that last number, there's an extra 2 in there, which is a little confusing. So I think that's supposed to be 2,125,000.
It sure is. Thank you for noticing that. That is definitely not a real number. We will change that on the slides. Thank you, Kim. I'm just making sure y'all are on your toes. I was a humanities teacher, so now thank you for that. And we'll get that changed on the official slides that you all have too. I did want to briefly talk about some upcoming recommendations that we have. CJ, if you want to go to this next slide. And so we do have 3 recommendations that are working their way through the process. If you think about Judy's flow chart, the first 2, the climate and culture TOSAs at the elementary school and the community engagement assessment, these are in the stage of having received feedback from the stewarding body, been refined, and we're going to be getting feedback from the advisory body during our next week's meeting. And so we are kind of halfway through the process. The Colonel Wright and Dry Hollow Elementary Vice Principals, this is a little bit earlier in the process. We have received feedback from the stewarding body, but we have not shared that out for feedback yet with the advisory body. So I'm going to talk just briefly about what these recommendations are so that you are aware. So the climate and culture TOSAs at the elementary schools, this was actually brought forth by a building administrator, again, based on data, looking at what is needed across the schools with regard to mental and behavioral health, as well as thinking about restorative practices, which is part of the district strategic plan, as well as the SIA work. And so the recommendation will establish climate and culture TOSAs, so teachers on special assignment, and they will provide assistance for all staff using restorative approaches. And the goal is that the TOSAs will align practices across all 3 schools and build staff capacity to utilize strategies really to yield a positive school culture and climate. And so currently the recommendation asks for full funding for 3 positions over the next 3 years. Because if this is approved, it wouldn't be approved until year 2 of North Wasco being in the program. So we're looking at 3 years of funding. And this includes both compensation for the individuals as well as relevant professional training. Again, this is in its current form. So as we know from what Judy and CJ described, there could be changes in terms of the amount of funding, but just putting in there what the current request is. There's also a request for a recommendation for community engagement assessment. And this recommendation is a one-time funding request for $27,993. And this would be to contract with Scholastic Education Solutions to do a comprehensive assessment of the district's family and community engagement practices, aligned with welcoming practices, communication systems, information systems, and family empowerment. This work is really aligned with integrated guidance in the community engagement toolkit. And the recommendation asks for, again, one-time funding for the outside assessment. And then the last recommendation that is our newest is short-term funding for Colonel Wright and Dry Hollow to be able to continue their vice principal positions. Again, I want to just note this is short-term funding, given that these positions are currently being funded through other means. And so the intensive program would support the funding for these just for 1 year. These are not new positions, rather existing positions that would be temporarily funded through the intensive program in order to ensure the continuity of services so that schools can continue to meet the demands of the students within their buildings. The recommendation is designed only to be funded through the 24-25 school year, with the goal of discontinuing the recommendation after 1 year and absorbing the positions within general funds. Again, that will be something that we'll revisit in the spring to determine path moving forward. So just to kind of throw it out there, if all of these recommendations went through, this would increase the amount expended over the 4 years to equal about 1.2 to 1.5 million. So money is important, but I think we want to also make sure that we're really being intentional about the needs of the students, and again, sense making before decision making. So a lot of information. We will update the board when additional recommendations are either approved or where they're at in the process.
Hey, Allie, Joel's got a question.
Oh yeah, sorry, Joel, I didn't even see your hand.
That's all right. Thank you. To Jose's question, so the overall amount of this grant being 2.8, roughly 700,000 a year, is within the stewarding and advisory bodies. Is there like ongoing like budgetary oversight to make sure that we don't get to the end of year 3 and we've realized we've expended too much in funds?
Yes. So that is actually, we have a recommendation tracker that tracks all the recommendations and where they're at in terms of the process. And so all the expenditures are also tracked on that recommendation tracker. And we are actually going to be sharing this same information with the whole student success team when we meet next week, just to make sure that there's clarity around funding. But yeah, definitely funding is something that we'll continue to come back to so that there is a general awareness of where we are at.
So we're asking a funding stream for the Dry Hollow and Colonel Wright vice principals. Is Chenoweth on a different funding? It's already in existence and it's funded through other money.
Yeah, Dr. Bernal, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the Chenoweth assistant principal position is already budgeted in our regular student investment account dollars.
Okay, and that will go on?
Yes,
Okay.
that's why the request is only for the other 2.
Okay.
Okay, that was a lot of information. We're gonna maybe can we take like a couple minute break? Does that work for folks? Just to like recharge, stand up, walk around. Yeah, exactly. Like let things shake out in your head a little bit. Before you do that, please just remember that you have contact information for me as well as the steward. So you can always reach out if questions arise after tonight as you're continuing to think about this or looking at resources. So I'm gonna say, can we take a break until 7:25 and then we'll jump into data?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. We'll see you back in a few. So CJ, if you want to share slides again, we're going to jump into the data exploration.
You want the data slides, the slide presentation one?
Yeah. So I put those in there. So if you go into the slide 16 and share that, and we can walk through, Kim's going to walk us through looking at that data. Dr. Bernal, we're going to readjust timing a little bit, just given where we're at. For the slides that you are going to share around district strategies, what time do you want us to make sure that we kind of close down the data conversation by, so you have time?
I don't think our last slides will go very long. So, I mean, if we have between 5 to 10 minutes to cover the last bit of slides, will be good.
Perfect. All right. Okay, Kim, you are on.
Dun, 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 dun. All right, so we wanted to just do a little, I would say deep dive, but we're doing it in a short amount of time. So at least start diving into some of the attendance data that we have been studying with the student success team, with both the stewarding body and the advisory body. And that's some of the data that's been driving some of our recent recommendations. And so we want to share some of that data with you and look at it. So we're going to go through a few slides here. And I think there's 6 different slides with graphics around attendance. And what I'm going to do is walk us through. With each slide, I want to just have each of you, all of you, kind of share what is it that you're seeing in this slide, just talking about what we're seeing in the slide. And we'll do that for each of the 6 slides around what we're seeing in the data. And then we'll go back and talk about, in general, what's some of the meaning we're making about this and what some of the questions we have related to seeing these 6 different takes on attendance right now in the district. Okay. So CJ, if you want to show us the first slide. Okay, so we're looking at regular attendance, and regular attendance is defined as students who attend 90% or more of the time. So that's what we're calling regular attenders, okay? All right, let's look at that first piece of data. All right, so as you look at this slide, if folks can just kind of unmute and tell me what you're seeing in this slide. And I want to just have you do it rather than me so that we can make sense together of what it is that we're actually seeing. What do you see in this slide?
Kim, I'm wondering what those 3 different colors represent on the circles.
That is just kind of showing, like, it's visually, I don't really show anything, do they, Allie? It's just kind of a graphic.
It's part of the graphic. If you look at this online, if you click on the dark green circle on the outside, that's going to be the state. The county is the middle green, and then the blue is the district.
Thank you.
You're just seeing them in 3 different circles because it's screenshots instead of the dynamic nature of the website.
Okay, so all 3 are aggregates of those numbers that are inside the circles. Okay, thank you.
So it looks like we in North Wasco District do not meet the state level or the Wasco County level. We're just shy.
So we're just a little bit shy. We're pretty close to the county, 5.5% from the county.
Right. But even as you said, 90%, even at the state level, it's really low. Almost not quite 30% below what it should be.
Right. So even at the state level, only 62% of our kids are showing up 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sad.
Right. So that there's some context, right? So I think it's looking at where we are as a district and also just looking at where we are as a state. And I think if we had another circle for national level, it would probably be pretty similar.
Is there data to compare like district schools? So like in Wasco County, our 2 other districts in the county are much smaller. So they're just kind of a different, type of school district. And I don't know that that's quite a great comparison when you're talking districts the size of a singular elementary school. In our case, so I'm just wondering if it's even more relevant data for like districts, as opposed to just looking at a county level.
So that's a great question that we can kind of track in terms of getting deeper into the data. as we move on. And we don't have that for today because we're kind of taking
Okay.
a little bit more of a brief overview of it.
Understood.
But that's a great, right? It's going to be different based on a lot of different aspects and contexts.
Different dynamics, different sizes of
Yeah.
of towns or cities, and
Mhm.
yeah, they each bring different
Mhm.
challenges,
Correct.
obviously,
Mhm.
but that's where I would feel more relevant, like districts, and just, you know, how do we stack up against them
Mhm.
versus some that are just different than us from a
Mhm.
student enrollment.
Yeah. Great observation. All right, let's go to the next one, CJ. All right, regular attenders over time. This is very small, but right, you can see at the bottom, we've got 27, 17, 18, and we're going across to 22, 23. Right, obviously we don't have this year's data because it's not complete. So what are you noticing in this graph?
I noticed that in 1920 and about half of 2021, our district actually was above the state
Mm.
average.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the blue line is a district. If you can't read those small print, and the black is the state, or gray, whatever that is. What else are you noticing in this graph?
Regular attendees are going down both statewide and our own district. And more steeply after 2021.
Which is when what happened?
COVID.
We don't talk about that anymore.
But it's leveling positive, it's leveling out now, but it's not going back up either. So what is
Right.
that? That's
Right.
important.
So we see a drop, right? Yeah, when the
People
school shut
aren't
down.
returning, or attendance isn't good attendance isn't returning.
Correct, right? But you also notice it is at least starting to level off, and there is a slight increase,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
From 20 in the district there.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. All right, there's a lot going on here.
Whoa.
Okay, so the colors are years. And then you will see what's broken down in the bottom is each of those focal group categories that Ali talked about at the beginning. So we've got quite a rainbow here.
Oh, and those are years.
Right, so the red is 17, orange is 18. Yeah, those are each years. So, and I cannot answer the question for you. I think the state wasn't tracking foster care or shifted how they tracked foster care. So we don't have those earlier years there. I can't exactly tell you why that is. But other things that you want to point out that you're noticing in that data?
Kim, this is district level.
Yes, this is just North Wasco. Yes.
I might notice that 22, 23 over 21, 22, 6 of our 8 focal groups have improved their regular attendance data.
Mm-hmm. And for those same 2 years, I noticed that the migrant data and the talented and gifted data are some of the highest attenders. Anything else stand out that people want to note or have clarifying questions about?
I think it's remarkable that for our students classified as homeless between 2021, 22 and 22, 23, something happened. They became regular attenders at a higher rate, or they were just like disproportionately impacted.
potentially by being able to get to school online. Mhm. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so same color coding, but we're looking specifically at race and ethnicity. And I think there are some years where you don't have enough students to count in some of these categories, so you won't see colors there because of numbers. What do you, anything that you notice there that you want to pull out?
Well, the first one, the American Indian Asian Native, has dropped in attendance
Mhm.
last couple of years.
Mhm.
It's going back up a little bit, but interesting that it's dropped. You would think it would be higher now and less earlier. It's reverse. That's
Mhm.
interesting to me.
Mhm.
Same with Hispanic Latino.
Mhm.
What's going on there?
It's interesting to look at these graph sets versus the one that showed the linear chart where you could see that our rate of attendance out or lack of thereof outpaced at the state level, but then to see it these bars stacked up against one another just makes it look so much more drastic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, visuals really make a difference, don't they, and how you visualize that. Mhm. And what this, and there's limits in terms of what this tells us, right? In terms of how many students are in each of these categories as well, right? And how that impacts.
Well, what it really shows too is how COVID affected attendance, period, all the way
Yes,
across the board. I mean, that's the
exactly.
biggest message there, really.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And I think, do we have one more, CJ? Okay. So gender. And this is the first year that non-binary is tracked as a category, which is why that's the only one you're seeing. So we don't really have anything to compare to there, except that you're seeing that there are quite a few students, there are students identifying in this way, right?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But we're seeing some similar. I mean, I think one of the things I notice here is that before, I'll say, before COVID, basically, there were more female students were attending at higher rates.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, in these last 2 years, it's pretty even.
Mm-hmm.
All right, is that the last one, CJ, or is there another one? I can't remember. Oh, there is one more. Okay. Oh yeah, by school. So this is just for this year, right? 22, 23. So we're changing the color coding here.
It's for 22, 23, not 23, 24. So
22, 23.
last year.
Last year. Okay. Right. So the first one is the district as a whole, and then it's broken down by school.
Wow. I wouldn't expect that of the high school. That's the best, like has the most regular. Well, of course, that's also size of the, is that?
No, because it's because it's by percentages, right? It's percentages, so it's not necessarily by numbers.
Okay.
So they do have a higher percentage of students who are regular
Wow.
attenders.
That's interesting.
So these numbers are relative to the populations of these individual schools.
Right. Right. So the high school would be what it looks like about 70% of their students, as opposed to Chenoweth being like what 45% or such of their students.
And a few years ago, I mean, if you look back into other data, you'll see that those trends are actually, this is the opposite.
I know, that's
The
what
other
I
way.
was expecting to see.
And one of the things that I've wondered about is the younger students are more dependent on getting to school than the older students in some ways.
Mhm. Judy, did you have something to throw in there? Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to offer kind of a non sequitur observation for my fellow board members. So this is where it's really helpful for our ODE partners to come to town and walk around and actually visit our schools. And so then they get a sense for kind of our intuition about this data and how our town is divided and segregated economically.
Yeah. And where there are sidewalks to get to school is one of the other things we've looked at, for instance, right? You know, these little details of what gets in the way. All right, so yeah, so just maybe just a little bit of discussion, just looking at this data, and of course, bringing in what you know from your own perspective, like what questions do you have, or what kind of meaning do you make of looking at this data and thinking about where we're at with attendance in the district?
Well, one thing you see, the lowest schools of attendance data is Chenoweth and Innovations Academy. And so both of those schools handle students which have either, they're from poor economic families, maybe more troubled, maybe, I don't know. And then the mix of kids that come to Innovations, definitely those students need different ways of learning, so forth. So that it's I would call it more troubled students also. So it makes sense. It's just too bad we can't do better than this, you know what I mean? It's like we're trying really hard, I know that. And a lot of things are going on in every school. But
right. But these populations are potentially facing more barriers or having more struggles that they're having to overcome to get to school.
Exactly.
It'll make the point that both of those schools are in the same building where there's terrible walkability to school. And walking along with the walking school bus, paradoxically, Chenoweth had the most parents and kids walking in the walking school bus. So there's a glimmer of hope, right? Like if our Safe Routes to School program, which is grant funded, can help safely get kids to school and make it fun, then that may be a solution. And that's not even a recommendation for this program.
And we are working with Public Works to get better walking access. So that's been going on for how many years? 4 or 5 years. It's taken, and now that construction is actually going to happen for the next school year. So that's how long things take. Just to get sidewalks in, you're looking at maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
From the initial concept to planning to getting it engineered to building it, at least a decade.
And that's just one of the potential barriers, right?
Yeah, that's just
the
one.
sidewalks, right? And there's many other potential barriers, some of which we know and some of which we don't know yet, right? Which we need to do some more questioning with our families to figure out what are some of these reasons, right? And one of the things that the drop that we're seeing is statewide, and it's also national, right? So while it's not just a North Wasco issue, we have to use our context and our resources to figure out how to address it, right? We're not looking to national solutions. We're looking for local solutions into what do we need to do in North Wasco to help get our kids to school.
Another thing I see on this chart that is not the same as it would have been a couple of years ago is the attendance data for Colonel Wright and Dry Hollow. Dry Hollow would have been way up at the top. And Colonel Wright would have been less than it is now. So, that sticks out to me. Just because I've been around long enough.
No, and that's the kind of context that's helpful, right? Yeah. Yeah. Are there observations others want to make or thoughts that are coming up for you before we hear from Dr. Bernal on what some of the things are that the district is doing to try and address this?
The transportation thing, just for especially the elementary age for Chenoweth, Colonel Wright, Dry Hollow. Like currently, for our transportation department, anyone less than a mile is considered a walker. So I'm wondering, from a policy standpoint, do we need to look at that and reduce that to 0.75 or 0.5 And that way we capture more elementary age kiddos so that they're, able to take the bus as opposed to be considered a walker. But, I guess it'd be dependent upon, as we dig into this deeper, if transportation is number one, to me, that would be a potential solution if just providing the means of access to the bus for the kiddos that currently don't, just based on where they live physically from the building, could that bolster the attendance in some way?
Yeah, I agree, Jose, because with what's been going on lately, if I had a grade school student, they wouldn't walk a mile.
It's a different context today, right, than it was when we were kids.
Mhm.
Yep.
I think that there is there's a difference that we think about it differently than we used to.
Yeah.
My parents didn't think twice about me walking a mile to school.
I'm Gen X.
Mhm.
We would have walked 5 miles.
Well, that and let's be realistic. This town is not walker friendly or
That's right.
bike friendly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A lot of us grew up, where you could walk or take your bike, but a lot of it was facilitated just by the infrastructure. And unfortunately, this community lacks in addition to just the topography of the Dalles, there's some hills and they can present challenges for not only adults, but think about little legs who take, multiple strides just to cover the same distance. So I think it's something to kind of look at holistically, because I think we could do better, but we probably need to do some changes on our end that we have control over, I should say, because, to John's point, the idea and the want for sidewalks is definitely something that's been identified long ago.
Yeah.
We're making
Right.
strides in terms of getting sidewalks in place for some of our schools, but that's not all of the schools. And so, what levers can we pull as a district and not be dependent upon waiting for a process that others like the city or whatnot are involved with?
Right. And then how do we also figure out what other barriers are there besides transportation, right?
Oh,
Because that
and-
might not cover it all. Go ahead, Dana.
Agreed.
Mhm.
Well, I was thinking, at the high school level, it's so easy now to say, I'm not going to finish, I'll take my GED. There, that incentive not to finish is more readily available. I mean, well, I'm aging myself, but that was not an option. But, nowadays, you see kids not being able to finish school because of, economic hardship, where they're having to work and they can't do work and school. And so, when they get at that age, I think it's 17, you can sit and pass your GED and, you don't think any farther than that. And I don't know what the numbers are, here, but I that was one of the things I thought about, because I think that, even at the high school level, it's not a good number either. So, yeah.
So that might be something to look at for our students. What are the numbers on that? Yeah.
Interesting to look at this, and I don't know how to interpolate it, but, and I'm not to argue anybody's point, but it is encouraging to me to see that, I know this is just a 1-year snapshot, but by the time kids get to the middle school, from 2 of the 3 feeder schools that have lower attendance numbers, and those kids are still dependent upon either the bus or parents to take them there, that we do have a higher attendance rate at the middle school, it's interesting.
So it'd be something to look at. What is that, right? What's causing the positive things as well as what's causing the negative things? Is there something that we're doing? Is it something that's a shift in the mindset for parents? How do we dig deeper into that?
Well, just thinking about it, like from a geography standpoint, Joel, you're picking up both Chenoweth and Colonel Wright for the most part, because they'd be outside the mile for busing.
Yeah.
So then Dry Hollow, you'd capture a portion of them within the mile radius, but you're picking up, obviously Chenoweth with the lowest percentage. They're taken care of once they get to the middle school by having access to bus transportation provided by the district.
Yeah, that's true.
That 1 mile radius from the middle school actually probably serves those kids better, since they are then able to utilize the bus, whereas they would not be closer to their elementary school.
Yeah, because even like Chenoweth, I think Foley Lakes is within that mile. And so
Yes.
that they're considered walkers, and we all know
Right.
that
That's-
walking from Foley Lakes to Chenoweth is not
Safe.
safe,
Yeah.
and two, I wouldn't send my kiddos there either. So I think it poses a conundrum to parents, right? It's like,
Mhm.
how do I get my kiddo to school?
Yeah.
Another question I would have is, if we reduce the number of miles required to be able to catch the bus, I mean, the distance, can we afford that? I mean, how much does that cost us?
That's,
Yeah.
and there's some state requirements around that, right? In terms of, then if you're changing it, what the state would pay for versus, like you're saying, what you'd be responsible for.
We
So
really
that's,
have to look at that.
you'd have to look at that. And maybe this is a good opportunity now to kind of just pause this conversation and turn it over to Dr. Bernal. If you want to pull the slides down, CJ and Dr. Bernal can talk to us a little bit about what the district is focusing on and working on right now, so we can get a little insight into that.
I think there actually are slides for some of
There
the things.
are. CJ, can you bring the main presentation?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh
about
no,
that.
it's switching back and forth between different decks.
Not there. There you go. Or you can go to the next slide. So we're working on lots of different things, but in all of our work, even as we're talking about kids, whether it's academically, social emotionally, behaviorally, regular attenders, we approach it really with the lens of multi-tiered systems of support. And within multi-tiered systems of supports, we really think about it in terms of 3 tiers. And tier 1 really represents the universal approach, meaning all kids. What do we do for all kids to encourage good attendance? Tier 1 really targets universal strategies meant for all students. And then tier 2 digs in a little deeper and will provide early intervention for students who need more support to avoid chronic attendance. And then tier 3 digs in even more intensively, and we look at what intensive support do some of our students need that are facing maybe the greatest challenges in getting to school. Next slide, CJ. So some of the district-wide strategies we've been engaged in is focusing on creating welcoming environments and positive school climate and culture. And we're doing that through a variety of ways, trying to make sure that the facade of our schools are welcoming, that there's not barriers for people trying to get in and out of our schools, that they're pleasant when people arrive. So just that appearance. And then on the inside, working just obviously on our customer service and ensuring that we are servicing our families and our students in a very positive way and building relationships with all of them, and ensuring we're trying to understand more deeply, especially for our students and our families who are struggling in getting to school. What are those barriers and how can the school help to remove those barriers for those families? We're working also on creating universal district-wide systems and strategies for all schools, and I'll talk about those in the next couple slides. We are utilizing data to inform our decision-making. So we're pretty heavily engaged in looking at our data as we're considering decisions around regular attenders. And then highlighting the connection between good attendance and student success, and highlighting that in a variety of ways throughout our schools, on social media, on our web pages, and whatnot. Next slide, CJ. And so when we talk about school-specific strategies, we really look at like intervention targeting. So we try to ensure that our schools have lots of student activities and clubs for kids. We try to do things in an engaging way that really encourages school attendance and that makes our students want to come to school and be there every single day and not miss it for any non-essential type absences. Obviously, we understand that things like vacations and oversleeping, it happens. But when it becomes the norm rather than then kids coming to school every day, we dig in a little deeper and we try to understand that. When we think about like avoidance, if kids are avoiding school, maybe they're experiencing bullying, maybe there's some academic difficulty. Some of the things we might utilize would be like conducting what we call empathy interviews. So meeting with the student and the family to really understand what's going on. We may do home visits. We may conduct learning groups to address some of the avoidance behaviors that maybe we're seeing with some of our students. And then any just barriers such as chronic health issues, houselessness, trauma. Some of the things we might do are to have student support groups. We might look at having trauma-informed care within a class. And we often are working with our community supports, our community partners, referring students and families out to get additional support to help them with any of these barriers that they might be experiencing. Next slide, CJ. So some of the current work we're engaged in, almost all of our schools do personal attendance calls home. I know in Innovations Academy, for example, I know that they make personal phone calls home every day. They check in with families. They say, hey, we missed you. You weren't here today. Is everything okay? How can we, what do you need? Are you coming back to school? When are you coming back to school? So really engaging and getting down on that personal level. We have the creation of our prevention and intervention department, who CJ is now the lead. And so regular attender work falls under his department for prevention and intervention. We do have school counselors in both our in our high school, and then in our K-8, we have child development specialists. So we have those that are making connections every day with our families and our students. We do have school nurses in all of our schools, so that's a huge support, and especially understanding any of our students and families that are struggling with health issues and or just needing additional access to resources outside the school. Do have homeless and a foster liaison in our district who serves as the point person to help our families who are experiencing houselessness and or our foster children. We do school-wide events to promote climate and culture. All of our schools engage in different kinds of school-wide events. For example, tonight, Chenoweth has, in collaboration with the after-school program, are having a big STEM night, huge family event. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I attended another event, actually at Chenoweth. It was a dual immersion night. They had like 100+ families there. It was great. So all the schools are doing school-wide events to promote climate and culture. We have a great event coming up in June for our high school students. We're holding a resilience rally to really support the youth mental health and wellness of our high school students. So we're really looking forward to putting on that event. And we have many, many community partnerships with our mental health services. We partner with the Next Door. We partner with Center for Living. We partner with our hospital. We have many, many partnerships that we partner to get support for our students and families who are experiencing any kind of barriers when it comes to attending school regularly. And then in progress, we're working on solidifying and really streamlining and ensuring that we have consistency across the district as it relates to our implementation of intervention progress teams. And intervention progress teams at each school site would serve to really support our students who are identified as Tier 2 and Tier 3 students who are struggling either academically or behaviorally and or with regular attending school regularly to support those students. We're working to create a system for reviewing our chronic attendance reports, and we are in the process. We now have a draft of a framework for attendance for our district. And as soon as we finalize that draft, we will be rolling that out with our leadership team and going through that and what that looks like at the school site level and at the district level. And we're excited that we just recently, so 5 of our 6 schools have been identified for targeted school improvement. And that means that we will be receiving some federal dollars And we're excited to partner with the Next Door. And next year, we will be bringing on 3 youth outreach workers. We call them Meows, who will support all 6 of our schools. And they will be heavily targeting our students and families who are experiencing barriers and or not able to get to school regularly. And then, as you know, we have a recommendation in progress right now for our culture and climate TOSs at the elementary school to continue to create cultures and climates that are welcoming for our kids and really connecting with our students and families and building better relationships with them. Next slide. And really, like, how does this all connect with the intensive program? You know, the North Wasco and ODE teams, we've been working alongside one another this whole past year, really to support the district's goals, which are embedded within our 2027 strategic plan and also our 23-25 integrated guidance plan. As you know, we have some current things that we've already established. We've created the Director of Prevention and Intervention position to address some systemic barriers. We have the development of the student success team, and we have a special education review process underway with the active RFP process that's currently going on. And then we have some things in progress, as we talked about earlier tonight, which are the recommendation for the culture and climate TOSs and also the community engagement review. Those are both in progress and going through the process as we speak. So next slide. I think that was our last one. Yeah. So really next steps is really thinking about, I think, the work of the SI intensive program and how it's really come alongside us to help us with align really with our strategic plan, our integrated guidance plan, and how all those plans kind of interweave and braid together. And I think for the board, it's important to think about this work in terms of as we look to next year and developing our goals, both board goals and superintendent goals, and how we align those with all of this work. Anybody have any questions just about like the work we're doing and data we've looked at tonight?
I mean, I think it's great. I think some of the stuff we're looking at are definitely areas of improvement that we need throughout the district. I think the thing in my mind, especially with, you know, the budget cycle kind of fresh as well, is a lot of this just speaks to me in terms of just very people heavy or intensive. To be able to do the work and do it well requires people, and not just people that can wear an additional hat. Some of this in my mind are very specific skill sets when you're talking about, you know, communicating with families at home or doing the check-ins and all that. It's not just someone that can toss a hat on and say, I'm now doing this on top of all my other duties that I have. So I guess that's just one an observation and I guess slight concern, just because I think to be able to do good work, we do need more people. I think it'd be unrealistic to continue to expect, you know, our staff that already does great work to just add more hats to their extensive repertoire already. So I'm excited, but also kind of hesitant and trying to understand as we head through these lean times, how do we go about doing some of this great work that is much needed to make the improvements that ultimately our kiddos deserve. Yeah.
Any other closing thoughts or things you're thinking about as it relates to all of this work?
I was just wondering why, I think we talked about this earlier this year. So it's 3rd grade and 9th grade, but we've kind of left out that middle school. And I think that 6th grade consensus is needed as well, because there's a huge gap between 3rd grade and 9th grade. And that seems to be a you know, an area where there's a lot of absenteeism. It'd be interesting to be able to run that, because those sixth graders are going to go on to ninth grade, and it'd be interesting to see how many fell through the cracks between sixth and ninth grade. I know that's my favorite number, 6, I guess.
Well, I want you to know that doesn't mean that we're not looking at that data. We are. We are. We're looking at all the data.
No, I know we are. Yeah.
Yeah, the third grade reading and the ninth grade, those are just the state ones that were identified and that they're tracking, but we're tracking all of it.
Yeah.
And looking at all of it.
Well, to Jose's point, you know, that it's a real conundrum right now because you do need specialized people to do things that we need to do. And yet we're in lean times economically, and there's a lot of pushback from the community about adding such positions. So it's a real conundrum to me, how you know, do that work.
I think that's why what Ali said is like in this process, it's a very slowed down process and it's a very thoughtful process, and it takes into account a lot of feedback. Like today I was working with Ali on the initial round of feedback we got on one of the recommendations, and like going through and answering and responding to like warm feedback, cool feedback, questions people have. And so it's very to me, it feels very intentional and very like it's very thoughtful, and it's just very slowed down process. You're not trying to rush through something, right? And it goes through, as Judy said, like in her visual, like sometimes many iterations. So
yeah.
With respect to a lot of things that we've talked about, you know, reasons that we are kind of assuming for the drop in attendance that we've seen over the last few years, will part of this process be to try to seek to understand why that's happened? Because, you know, the transportation situation in our district hasn't changed drastically. The infrastructure in our city hasn't changed drastically, but yet, you know, regardless of enrollment numbers, that's a completely different number. I would assume that those two metrics maybe kind of follow one another, or they're close. But why has are we going to try to seek to understand in this process why attendance has become such an issue for our students?
Yeah, and I would just say that is one of the priorities that the stewarding body is really leaning into. And so we did some work at the beginning of the year with the stewarding body to really map out assets and needs across the districts. And attendance came up all over the board. And so we actually had a kind of work session around attendance a number of months ago, really to figure out like what are we gonna do, what do we know, what do we want to know. And so we're going to have another work session around attendance during our next stewarding body meeting, and likely work through some like root cause analysis, like fishbone protocols and different improvement science, like driver diagrams, to really get to that root cause. Because I think, again, we're looking at numbers, right? And numbers tell us one story, but they don't tell us the stories of why. They just tell us trends and patterns. So Joel, you are right on. And that's something that the stewarding body is definitely identifying as a priority as we move forward. Know that the folks on the advisory body are also really focused. And we were actually able to, part of this process is doing site visits. And so CJ organizes site visits 3 times a year for myself and the stewards to come up and do exactly what Judy said, like look at the community, walk around, better understand, ask questions, have conversations. And the focus of our last site visit was all around attendance. And so we were able to go and really learn from administrators and teachers around what they thought potential barriers were and what strategies they were using to address those barriers. So super long-winded way of saying like absolutely a priority and a focus of the program because it's a focus of the district.
I also want to just add, Ali, that it's also a statewide focus, Joel. Like this is a statewide focus that everyone is concerned about fellow superintendents across Oregon are concerned that students aren't coming to school regularly and really understanding that. And part of our advocacy work heading into the long session is to, we have some work groups going. And so like I'm part of a COSA work group with a group of superintendents who are actually focusing on this very area. And also understanding it, unpacking it, understanding what are the barriers, and then going to advocate for it at the legislative level. What that looks like, I don't know yet, because our work groups haven't started. They start next week.
And I just would like to add that Joel, your question actually hits at what I think is probably the biggest piece of the whole thing, which is what is our community's story specifically? And that's what we are looking to find out. We can look at, all the trends and things, and there's definitely lots of things that are similar and the same across communities. But the really granular work is to get in there and figure out what are the exact things that are really preventing people from getting to school, and then starting to come up with solutions for those things.
Any other closing thoughts as we wrap up? We're a little past time, so. I really want to thank Allie and Kim for joining us tonight. And I know you haven't had an opportunity to meet Karen and Sarah yet, but next week, our stewards actually will be here in person, visiting and be spending some time with us next week. So board members, if you're interested in connecting with them face to face, please let Cindy or I know, because we can arrange that. And or if you want to take part in some of the stuff we have planned next week, please join us. We would love that. And Allie and Kim, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts.
I would just say thank you. This has been a beautiful opportunity to, see you all, and Judy talks very highly about you. So getting to see faces with names is always incredible. And yeah, as Dr. Bernal mentioned, like we'll be there. And so getting to connect with you in person would be incredible, outside the little boxes. And I try to come up as much as possible. So if there's also something that, you all are up to and you'd, like someone there, please let us know, because we can't do this work from afar. We really need to, be as close to the work that's happening on the ground as possible. And as CJ mentioned, get to know those stories. And, we can't do that sitting in our own spaces. We need to do that being in your community. So, if you want us there and it feels meaningful, just let Dr. Bernal know or give us a call, and we'll definitely make it happen. And I would just say thank you to Dr. Bernal for inviting us tonight, for creating this space, and for just being such a thoughtful partner in this work. It's a true joy to be in partnership with North Wasco.
Thank you for all the information.
All right, I'll hand it back to you, Chair Jones.
Great. Again, thank you. That was a lot of information, gives us a lot to think about, and we appreciate the work you guys are doing. Any other board members have anything they want to say?
I would say thanks again, Vice Chair Richardson, Director Toole, Superintendent Bernal. I know this work means a lot of extra meetings for the three of you and work, but thank you. It's much appreciated, because obviously there's things that we can do to make the experience for our students better.
Yeah, thanks to the ODE for really wanting to understand our kids, because that's, they're our North Star, and you guys want to understand them and walk a day in their shoes. And so that's meaningful to us. And thanks for the money.
Yeah, and thank you for putting all the energy into our schools and just being a part of our community a little bit more than you were before. Yep.
Next year, I'm coming up for the Cherry Festival. I missed it this year, and I'm really sad about it. So
come watch our girls play softball. That's what you need to do.
Really?
They're amazing.
Awesome. All right, I'm in.
Playoff game on the 21st at home.
21st of this month?
Yep.
next Tuesday.
I will be in town.
We'll be there. No, but
Yeah.
we'll be working. We'll have the advisory meeting till.
We will. Okay, we'll have to come for the next one.
All right,
We'll
thank
sneak
you
it.
all.
We'll sneak a camera in.
There you go.
All right. If that's it, then I will adjourn this meeting. And again, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Good night.